What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredient that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jan Keck, and we speak about the creation of magical human moments. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, just scroll down to the show notes and find the link to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Hello, Jan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's it already. We're already recording. That was quick.
Yes, I cannot wait any longer. We were already sharing so much value, and now it's time to include the audience.
I know, feeling a little bit bad that they missed out on the things we discussed before, but maybe we'll work it into this next few minutes.
Absolutely. And before we're getting there, Jan, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
I actually was thinking about this question, and I think it was either when I was updating my LinkedIn profile or when I was updating the About page on my website, and I needed to figure out what to call myself. And the answer to that question I've been struggling with probably forever. It was, I think now 4 or 5 years ago, when a coach asked me, when somebody introduces you on a podcast and they will say, "Welcome, Jan, the blank," like, what should they say? And that sent me into a big tailspin of trying to figure out, well, what am I doing? What is the value that I bring? And what's the one word I can put that describes everything?
That everyone understands, right?
And that everyone understands too. Yes, that would be ideal. And the things that I came up with were like authentic vibe creator. And like really strange things that would definitely not help people understand what I do. Yeah. So I remember that on my About page, even right now, the list just gets longer. Mm-hmm. Like I think right now I wrote down facilitator and trainer and experience designer and German engineer and husband and father and adventurer. Like I just added so many things that hopefully people get a sense of who I am. But it's not like facilitator was one of the things that I added, I think mostly because I started running lots of workshops and events, and I wanted to work more with organizations. And just by looking around other people that I saw on LinkedIn who I know what they were doing, seems like that was a word that they were using. So I just was like, let me add that to the list and see if that helps.
Thank you for your honesty. I love that. And I must say, once I did a search on LinkedIn and found that there are 1.5 million people who would call themselves facilitator as a profile description. And I was intrigued because before that, I always thought it was a niche. Well, quite a big niche, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. Anyway, and on your LinkedIn profile, if we stay there, you describe that you're creating magical moments. So I guess this goes hand in hand with the experience design, that a magical moment is a very special experience. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I actually talk about magical human moments because I did run a workshop called Magical Human, how to create magical human moments on Zoom, and had an actual magician show up.
Beautiful.
But luckily, she totally understood that this was not about like doing magic tricks on Zoom, but about helping people connect with each other. Like, to me, that's the part where those magical human moments happen, is when two people connect with each other and they feel heard, they feel seen by someone that they maybe just have met. Like having these moments in a virtual space, I would say, where you forget that you're looking at a screen because you're so connected to the other person, to the moment that you're in. You're so much in the present that it doesn't matter that we're not in the same room. Like, it feels like we're having this shared experience.
I love that. And what do you think is it that creates or enables this magical human moment?
I think it's a few things that need to happen in the right order. I actually call it my kind of campfire methodology, my campfire formula, where if anybody who's ever been camping, and I'm not sure if you're a big camper or know how to start a fire, but I think everybody understands that if I were to hold up a lighter up to a big log, it will probably take a really long time if it would ever catch on fire. But if I hold up the lighter to a piece of paper, then that burns really quickly, and then I add little sticks, and I add my kindling, and then at the end I put the big log on the fire, and then we actually have a campfire that we can sit around and share stories and all of that. And you'll probably hear more about like camping metaphors and why that is important to me later in this interview. But I kind of approach any experience, any workshop the same way. We have to start with very small steps and making sure that all the participants, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel valued. Mm. And only then we can over time go like deeper by like small little increments. So by the end, we have the opportunity to do something that is asking our participants to step outside of their comfort zone. Mm. And when two people are vulnerable together, like they both are outside of their comfort zone, but they feel supported either by the facilitator, by the group, by each other, that they can actually do that. I think that's where those magical human moments happen.
It's nice. And an example comes to my mind. I was finally participating in a Liberating Structures immersion workshop this week. And Ewan LeBron, who is also on the podcast, he shared an exercise where every participant pinned one other. So he formed the group, and then you had to pin this person and then just mirror each other. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a brilliant experience to be in a room with 30 other people, but to have this, it was a magical human moment, although we didn't speak a word.
Yeah. And I would say that sometimes when you don't put in the time, like to me, it takes time to build that trust and that like safety for people. For in a conversation, in a relationship, in a workshop, like all of that to me is like the same thing. You need to put in the time. And sometimes we might do, like if this was the very first activity they did in the workshop, I know that some people might have been really uncomfortable with that. Mm. And they were just not there yet. Like we have to, even like everyone knows the person who's super comfortable being vulnerable right from the beginning, and they sometimes go a little bit too far and share a bit too much. So it makes everyone else feel uncomfortable.
Fremdscham.
Yeah. So we have to kind of go on that journey together at the same speed. So, and one of the examples I can give is I used to have this activity where I have people partner up with us, like somebody, like just walk around the room, find a partner, come up with a dance move together. And in the feedback form after that workshop, I had one person share that was the most uncomfortable thing. They were like about to like leave the event because they were asked to do a dance move with a stranger while other people were watching or like around, possibly seeing that. And that made me understand, okay, there's certain things that are uncomfortable for some people and not for others. Mm-hmm. Same thing with one sharing something, sharing an answer to a question could be vulnerable for one person, but not for another. Mm-hmm. And for me as a facilitator, I changed that activity to take smaller steps because dance move was too scary. But once I said, okay, everybody create a synchronized movement to the beat of the music, everybody was able to do it. Nobody said like, oh, that's too scary. But basically they were doing dance moves. I just framed it differently.
I love that. That's brilliant. It's funny how, sometimes words, we have these kind of maybe childhood traumata that we still relate. Oh, I cannot dance. It's like I cannot draw. And if you give them just squares and triangles and a circle, say, okay, make something out of it, suddenly they draw. Yeah,
exactly. So the way we introduce activities have to kind of go with, okay, what's like the easiest first thing that we can ask people doing? I actually now have another kind of structure on how I get people to dance on Zoom, because I actually also am one of those people who, if there's like a spontaneous dance party, I'm maybe moving a little bit, but I'm like not dancing. Mm-hmm. So taking that to my advantage, I usually ask people to like, show me one finger. And everybody can like that's easy. I can show one finger. Okay, wiggle your finger. Okay, now I'm going to put the music. Now I'm going to wiggle one finger to the music. Now we're going to add the other finger. Now we're going to start adding the wrists. Now we're going to add the elbows. And suddenly by the end, people are dancing, but I never asked them to dance. I just asked them to do movements to music. And it's always really hilarious when I tell people at the end, hey, did you notice that we're having a dance party? And then they light up. They're like, oh my God, yes, we are.
Wonderful. And I wonder, would you translate this to also other exercises that are maybe vulnerable on a different level, or honest on a different level?
Yeah, I always think of how can we kind of ease into kind of the end goal that I have. Like, what's the activity that might have the biggest impact, but what do we need to do to get there? Like, what is the finger wiggle for that activity to get people warmed up to the idea? Even thinking of like questions, right? We can ask a question that is maybe just below the surface, can go a little bit deeper, and then by the end we'll have the real vulnerable conversation.
What would be a good, I can imagine that, for instance, if you're sending participants into a breakout room, it's difficult to give them a question or a task that allows them to go as deep as possible without throwing them off immediately. Because what you don't want is that they end up in the breakout room and say, I'm not going to answer this question. What do you think about this question? And then they talk on the meta level about the question, how frustrated and uncomfortable they feel. So what would be your advice to find this kind of sneaky level?
Yeah, I actually would say that the first time I send people to the breakout room, I don't need them to do anything vulnerable, or at least not too far out of the comfort zone. I just want them to get comfortable with the process of asking a question and listening to somebody else's answer. And depending on what the goal is for the workshop, if it is about like listening and communication, I might even just give them some advice on how to be a better listener, how to be more present with each other when you're listening. And the question doesn't really matter as much. I would just use one that I know will not result in people talking about what I do and things that they've shared with before. Like, ideally, the question is asking something new, something that they can be curious about, something positive. Like some of the deeper questions that I sometimes like to ask, they might be about memories that are not so great. But I would never start with that. Like, the first question always has to be something that is exciting, that people are like, hey, that's actually something I want to talk about.
Yeah, and I can talk about. But then still it's a slippery slope, because if you ask, okay, what made you smile today? Well, you don't want people to admit, actually, I didn't smile today.
In that case, you could say, what made you smile in the last week?
Yeah.
And hopefully that will help.
Yeah.
But maybe if somebody didn't smile in the last week or in the last day, that's also really good awareness to have. And maybe there's something around that to be shared. But that depends on the person, how willing they are to be vulnerable, I guess, in that first round already.
So if I understand you correctly, you would design your workshops and the exercises around those who are least comfortable with sharing and group activities and all of that.
I often think about the people who have, let's say, social anxiety and the people who are super extroverted. How can I level the playing field so they both can participate equally? Because a person who's super extroverted, if they might be super comfortable talking for a long time with just like a question. So for them, it's more important from the facilitator perspective to give them, okay, you have 2 minutes to share, and maybe here's the structure of how the conversation is going to go. And for the other person, the structure is also really important, because having a question, knowing who starts the conversation, is also something that I always include, because that can create some awkward moments that we definitely can avoid. Like person with like next birthday coming up, or first letter in the alphabet, or some really easy ones that I often include, because then we're like, I basically want to avoid any small talk, especially in breakout rooms. If I can get people right in the conversation, then even the person who loves to have deep conversations and hates small talk will appreciate that. The person who loves talking will appreciate that, because they're actually getting to talk and share right away.
Yeah, and I think at the end, everyone likes to talk about themselves if they feel safe enough and if they have the impression that the other person is actually interested. So why would people get into small talk if actually I don't know if I know anyone who actually enjoys small talk, and still most people do it. What's a trap that we can avoid?
Yeah. Well, one thing is when you get asked a question that you don't want to talk about, or if you've answered so many times, then you already see it in people's facial expressions, like, oh,
again.
And then they just repeat the thing that they've said 100 times. Like, hey, so what do you do? Is one of those questions that triggers that for me, and I know for lots of others too. So asking questions in a different way, like I think of, well, that's already talking about the solution, but you were asking about the problem, the challenge. I think it's often we don't know another question to ask, like it's just become habit of, especially I feel like in North America, where when you go to any networking event, what do you do is the first question that most people ask, because we've just been primed to do that. It's the same thing of asking, how are you, but not really listening to people's answer. Like we don't actually want to know how you are. It's just, that's the way we greet each other.
Polite way. I love Patrick Cowden in the It Never Done Before. He always starts with sending people in the breakout rooms with the question, how are you? Really? And you have 2 minutes. And if your answer is, I'm fine, how are you? Then 2 minutes can be quite long.
Yeah, well, that's where the structure comes in really handy. Like if he said, answer that question and then come back, people would answer the question and then come back. But because you have 2 minutes to fill, it's more uncomfortable sitting in awkward silence than just keep talking. So it motivates people to share a little bit more. Plus the like really is adding something else to it. And actually with Patrick's process, there's one thing that I started doing in the last year, because everybody's going through challenging things with pandemic and like American politics. And there were lots of topics that people wanted to talk about. But I always said at my events, it's like a small talk free and a COVID talk free zone. And sometimes, because big world events happen, I needed to also acknowledge that they're happening. I couldn't completely ignore it. And I would use a little bit of like Patrick's formula, asking people, okay, you have 2 minutes to share what's on your mind or what's on your heart. And after one person shares, the other person needs to acknowledge and appreciate something about that. And I found that is really powerful, because once you verbalize what's on your mind and somebody else receives it and you feel seen, you feel heard, then we can move that to the side and we can actually focus on what we are here to do in the workshop or in the event. Yeah,
it's almost like an emotional download. And it creates, I think, also these magical human moments. Because very often I have the impression that in a conversation, everyone is just so preoccupied with themselves, or has the impression that they have to answer or give advice or to say something smart. That if your only role is just to acknowledge and appreciate, you realize that actually as a human being, you don't need much more. Right?
Yeah, there's a real power in having that reflection back.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's a lot of people in the world who do that naturally. Unless you give the structure, most people would never think to appreciate or acknowledge somebody else for sharing something. They would right away launch into a story about them.
Yes. Or say, oh, here's what you should do.
For advice.
Yeah. Which reminds me of a study that I once read about satisfaction of clients at the McDonald's drive-thru. And they realized that clients who were the most happy about the service, when the person on the other end would just repeat the exact wording of what they said. Not, oh, thank you, I wish you a happy day, or some flattering words, you have a nice car. No, just repeating the same words. Because then the person who gave the order felt seen and heard and appreciated somehow, which is actually a very nice study. It's totally unrelated, but I think it points at the human need we have.
Yeah, and that's, I think, really important if you're designing any experience, to make sure that people do feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
Especially in a virtual space where it's really easy to hide as a participant in like a Zoom grid with like 30 other people.
Absolutely. I was just thinking back over your example of the networking event where most people start with, so what do you do? And I think a nice tweak would be, so how would you explain a person on Mars what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. I love asking, what are you excited about right now? Or what excites you? What is something fun that happened in the last week? And not make it about work. Because there's so many people who don't really enjoy their job and they don't feel like they want to talk about it. And when you ask, what do you do? They're forced to talk about something they're not enjoying. So if we're thinking back to first question and first conversation should be about something positive, that is making them talk about something that they don't have good memories associated with it.
True.
So I always leave it open to talk about, hey, if you're excited about work right now, then tell me about it. But if you're excited about, I know, going on a trip with your family or building a garden in your backyard, then tell me about that. Yeah. And I think we would get to know a person probably better if they want to talk about the topic.
Absolutely. And then you have immediately a hook, because it's actually beautiful to see how people light up when you ask them, so what are you excited about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then it makes it easy to find a real conversation deeper than small talk. And would you drive these deep conversations, or do you see a difference when you work with groups of strangers for instance, you're doing a lot of facilitators trainings. So there I suspect that people have chosen to sign up for the training, so they are kind of open to be vulnerable and go there. But when you work with teams, for instance, of coworkers, would you tweak it? Are deep conversations as important when you work with teams?
They're as important, if not more important, but I would approach it very differently.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, just the fact, like you already said, when somebody attends as an individual an event or workshop or a training that I do, they know what they're getting into. At least I hope so, with the language and kind of the examples that I show, that we are going to be vulnerable and like sharing personal things. But if a manager signs up a team and I have a conversation with the manager, then the employees, the team members don't really opt in. Sometimes it feels like it's mandatory for them to attend. And there's a few things I do to help almost start with those first sparks of the campfire before we even meet. Because I know that if they have no idea who I am and why we're here and why I have to do this thing, the moment we start, I have to work a lot harder than if I can maybe already prime them a little bit better. So I usually send a video message out and I ask the manager to share it with the team. It's just like a 2-minute video message where they get to know me, my personality, and that already helps because then I'm not a complete stranger the day off. But I also tell them about some of the expectations and add some mysterious clues of fun things we might be doing. So they start getting excited about it. Expectations are really important because I'll be sharing, hey, this will be super interactive. We'll be in breakout rooms. If you can have your video on, that would help you really feel more connected to each other. So I make sure that they know when I sign into this, I'll be expected to have a working camera and a working microphone, and I'll be asked to engage. And that way it'll be much easier.
I love the idea of sending a video message. And I must say that I came across your profile on LinkedIn because you're sharing so many creative ideas of, improving someone's experience. How do you come up with all these ideas?
That's a really good question. Let me think on that. I think I get inspired by looking what other people are doing in different industries, like not just people who facilitate workshops, but like all kinds of things, like people who do virtual magic shows, going back to magical human moments. I'm like, well, maybe there's something to learn from there. People like, I don't know, watching comedy specials on Netflix. Sometimes I get inspired, reading books, but a lot of it comes down to how can I do something that I would appreciate as a participant? Because if I put myself into the shoes of an employee who just got signed up for a workshop that is called Campfire Conversations or Deeply Connected Teams, like what are some of the things they might be thinking about. Okay, this is going to be us holding hands and singing Kumbaya in a circle. So my first thing that I share in the video message is, so you're probably expecting that we'll hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but this is not going to be it. There's no like cheesy trust falls. We're going to be doing something completely different, and kind of explain what we're actually doing. And this is, again, really important for teams. You need to make sure that you talk to those. Like, I actually try to imagine the person who sits with their arms crossed, leaned back, really far away, like in person or in front of the computer, doesn't matter. What thoughts are they having? Like, who's this German guy with a hat? Like, why should I listen to him? Try to answer those questions before they even can ask them. And then make sure they know the value of, why is it important that you know your coworkers a little bit more? Like, one thing I talk a lot about in the workplace is psychological safety and like the studies around that. And once you hear the research, then it's not just my opinion, it's actually proven by someone else. So there's a little bit more credibility. So I have to work a lot harder in the beginning before they show up in the first like 20, 30 minutes to make sure we can actually do the work that we want to do.
Makes sense.
Hey, since you are listening to this podcast, I was wondering whether you get enough opportunities to exchange, practice, and experiment with other facilitators. Have you heard of the Never Done Before Facilitation Festival? It's a 24-hour global event that is co-created by its participants and delivered by some of the most popular Workshops Work podcast guests. Visit neverdonebefore.org for more information. Use the code WORKSHOPSWORK to get a 20% discount. The festival starts as soon as you join. Now, back to the show.
So what is the story about the campfire?
Well, the campfire story. So let's go back, I think, 5 or 6 years. So I'm from Germany originally, but I now have lived in Canada for 14 years. So I had to rebuild my whole network. I didn't know a single person except the one acquaintance I had because she was an exchange student at my university and she let me crash on her couch for the first 3 days. But I literally had to like rebuild everything. And I was not even planning to stay here until I met my now wife and decided to come back. And in the beginning, I collected a lot of connections on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and was really excited once I hit the 500 connections on LinkedIn after a couple of years. But I did not really know anyone. Like, I had a small group of people that I met with often, but did I actually know them well? Not really. But I was not aware of that until I attended this weekend retreat where the kind of campfire methodology that I shared earlier was just executed beautifully. Like, we all came together on shared values. We got really uncomfortable by the conversations we were sharing, by climbing a high rope structure in January in Canada where it was freezing cold, and we had to work together and like hold the rope so our teammate doesn't fall down. Like, we were definitely outside of our comfort zone. And at the end, on the last day, I was looking around the room when everybody was saying goodbye to each other. I could literally feel the energy vibrating out of people's bodies. I can now almost describe that as a spiritual experience, where if you know the Care Bears that shoot these rainbows out of the bellies, like it's a TV show, that's kind of what I was imagining, just like energy shooting out of people's like hearts. And I did not understand what happened until later I realized this was a moment where I felt this deep sense of belonging that I hadn't felt since I left Germany. And that was 6 years after the move. So I just found my people at that weekend, and I told myself, I need to have more experiences like that. I need to find more people like that. How do I do that? Okay, well, seems like one of the things was having valuable conversations. Another thing was people aligned with the same values. And the third thing, because this was like north of Toronto, I did not have any cell service. So I actually turned off my phone for like 3 days. And just removing that distraction, I think, was a huge factor in that as well. So now I don't know if people are able to see this, but I have this padded envelope that I call a cell phone sleeping bag. And at my in-person events, I would have people create that and then put their phone in it.
So just 1 second for the audience, because I'm not sharing the video. So Jan is holding a envelope with these bubbles inside. So
yeah, like a bubble wrapper
envelope on which he wrote "sleep well" and a little cell phone in a sleeping bag.
Yes. So that's actually now sitting at the side of my desk. So if I want to focus on work or a call, I can just put my phone in there, so I'm not tempted to check it all the time.
That is a perfect nudge. Very nice.
So in person, I said, okay, what if we not only put our phones away, but we go so far away from civilization that you don't have cell service and it just doesn't work? So I took people on a camping trip, and that's also where I came up with the idea for my Ask Deep Questions cards that have like 3 different levels of questions that are kind of going like same kind of methodology of curious questions, then there's brave questions, and then there's vulnerable questions, and you're supposed to go like level by level. I created those for the car ride because it took 4 hours to get to the starting point of where we got the canoes, and I didn't want people in the other car just do small talk or be on their phone. So I just gave them, here's a couple of cards with some questions, facilitate your own conversations, get to know each other. So by the time we arrive, like the experience starts when we leave the city, not when we arrive 4 hours later. And that was the like kickoff point for this whole business of running workshops and facilitation and doing trainings. Up until that point, I had a video marketing agency that I've run for, at that point, I think 5 years, which now has been shut down. And this is like my full-time gig.
Wonderful. And I can imagine that you might get similar comments than I did once, where I had a date and my friend with whom I was sharing that, she said, Miriam, can I give you one advice? Please don't facilitate your date. She's actually quite right. So it's this tendency to also kind of facilitate even other outside of work conversations. And I think it's a very fine line between asking curious questions and really engaging in a conversation that is meaningful without making the other person feel that they are facilitated or coached.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with how you listen and where your focus is. Like, I think it's from the co-active coaching like model that there's 3 different levels of listening.
Mm-hmm.
The first level is where you're in your own head. Like when somebody else is talking, you're thinking about maybe something not even related to what they're saying, like your grocery list that you have to do, or like an email that you need to send later. The second level is where your kind of focus, your attention is on the other person. So you're really listening to what they're saying. But then the third level is you're not only listening to their words, but also the tone of voice and their body language and the, surroundings in the room, where you're just so present with everything that you can pick up cues of if somebody says they're really excited about something, but doesn't sound that they're excited, you could ask a follow-up question to that. And to me, that is kind of like meditation. Mm-hmm. You need to catch yourself when you're going back to your own, like focusing on yourself, and like, no, focus the attention back on the other person. And that's, I think, when you're facilitating, you're in your own head, mm-hmm. versus when you're really listening, you're so focused on the other person. And I, as a facilitator, it's sometimes challenging because I want to be part of the conversation. I want to put my attention on the other person. Like when there's an uneven number and I'm in a breakout room, but I almost can't stay there very long because I need to check the time and make sure that I get back first so I can welcome people and play some music. So it's something that, yeah, you can't really do both at the same time well.
This is a very good observation. This explains a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Tell me more.
So definitely you cannot participate and facilitate at the same time. But what resonates with me is this going back into our own minds of feeling the urge to be in control somehow. And thereby, being on a meta level on the conversation, not really deeply in. On the other hand, I wonder, this is then maybe the high art of facilitation, to really focus on the group conversation, to then be able to synthesize where you have to have, on the one hand, in some part of your brain, you need to have the structure of the next 5 steps in mind to see, okay, do I need to change that? Are we on course? Does it make sense? And then still be able to listen so deeply that you can synthesize what they were just saying and maybe pointing them into a different direction.
I think it's the skill of switching back and forth quickly. Because trying to do both at the same time doesn't work. Yeah, it's the same thing with multitasking. Like we can't do a bunch of things at the same time, but we can switch back and forth.
Yeah.
But I guess now kind of brainstorming myself, with multitasking, if you switch back and forth a lot, then you're not really getting things done either.
Exactly.
So if you can, I guess, create the structure for whatever you're facilitating, so you know, okay, for the next 5-10 minutes, I can just be fully present with this conversation, and then have some kind of reminder, okay, maybe looking at the clock quickly is not going to take you really out of the conversation, quickly, and then coming back in. So, at this time, okay, now I need to kind of put my facilitator hat on again and move to the next activity.
Yeah. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
For me personally, it's if either people don't feel, actually, it's not either. If people don't feel supported and safe to be vulnerable and step outside of their comfort zone, that's when it fails. And that could either be that they just get so caught up in small talk and just talking on the surface and never really going to the next level, or that we went too deep too quickly and they're this is too much. I'm like the person who was going to leave when I asked them to do the dance move. It's one of those two things.
Now I'm very curious. If this happens, and I think especially for starting facilitators, it might happen that they have this great idea, I want to create psychological safety, and then, oops, this was maybe too fast. What would be your advice on kind of bringing the ship back into a safe harbor?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot of good advice on when you went too far, but maybe one way you can help set it up better is framing anything as an experiment. People are so much more willing to take risks when it's an experiment. Hey, we're just trying this out and maybe it will work and maybe it will fail. Getting into that mindset before you do an activity with a group, then you can say, I guess we went a little bit too far. I guess our experiment failed. Let's just continue with the next thing. So it's much easier to, I guess, get out of that situation than if you don't talk about it. I always talk about how when we are outside of our comfort zones, there's a huge opportunity for growth. And it is going to be uncomfortable. And sometimes we are going a little bit too far. But that's just the learning process.
Absolutely. And what I like about the framing as an experiment, actually, I like 2 things. One is it also gives permission to fail to the group. So if you're framing as an experiment, okay, so we're not here to be perfect. I think it's a similar thing we observe with Never Done Before, where, okay, if you're doing something for the first time, let's learn from it. And it creates this kind of safety anyway, and connectedness, because it's exciting. You can be part of an experiment. And the other is that even if it fails, you then have the opportunity to reflect on it on a meta level. So if, for instance, a group comes back and you can see it. So usually when participants come back from a breakout group, you have all these smiling faces, right? For me, this is the moment as a facilitator when my heart jumps. Everyone comes back in the main room. I'm not lonely anymore, and all these smiles. And I can imagine that if we go too far, then all these people come back and you basically see it in their faces it wasn't the greatest experiment. But then you can actually pick up the experiment and say, so how was that? I sense that you're not all happy-glory. What went wrong? And this might then be the opportunity to go deeper to the meta level.
I actually, in my virtual facilitator training, I set this up from session 1. Actually, in this last cohort, I set it up in the kickoff party that we have to just run a couple of activities and set expectations of what's about to come the week before. And my text started going wrong already in the kickoff party. And I told them right away, look, things are going to go wrong, and I'm going to be transparent about every single thing. If like anything goes wrong, I will tell you, and I will tell you what I'm doing to fix it, and we'll talk through the steps. And if you have ideas, you bring them in, because you will learn so much more from me failing at something and hearing how I'm solving it than if I do everything perfectly and then you go like, oh my God, I will never be able to do it the way Jan does. And every time I get like in the feedback forums, people tell me the way I model that is one of the biggest lessons that they're taking away from it.
I love that. Do you have a list with all your kind of mistakes, failures, everything that went wrong? Just out of curiosity.
Too many to count. I feel like I've done a lot of mistakes because I do a lot of experiments.
Mm-hmm. Like that.
Like even to the point of where I will continue going through with something that I know is not going to work out, and telling participants that, so we can all learn why it doesn't work and feel what it's like if a participant has to go through it. Like I had one time, I took this list online that I found somewhere on choosing who goes first in a breakout room. Mm-hmm. And I just picked a random one that said, okay, who went to the dentist last? And as soon as my words came out of the mouth, I'm like, oh, that was a bad idea. And I told the participants, okay, before anybody chooses, this is a bad idea. Don't ever do this, but still do it and see how it feels. And it was very uncomfortable.
I love that. And I can perfectly imagine a workshop where you just guide a group through one
mistake
to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be a good topic for a workshop.
Yes, never done before.
Mm-hmm.
I remind you of that, if I may.
Yeah, although I would have to do a new mistake to make sure that it's never done before in the session.
Maybe a sequence of all the mistakes is new enough.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I have not done like a workshop on.
Cool. Looking forward. What is your favorite exercise, if you do have one?
In person or virtual? Because they're different. Because when you asked me, you sent me that question ahead of time. I went back to, I haven't done something in person for so long. And I actually went back to some of my activity database that I have and found these activities that I love to do and I haven't done for so long, and it actually made me a bit sad that I have not had a chance to do things with high fives and handshakes and hugs. So maybe I can just share that specific activity as inspiration, that when we're able to meet in person again, we could maybe implement something like that. Yeah. So the activity is actually called From Strangers to BFFs. Best friends forever. And I like to use that as a kind of closing activity because it's really long and it basically takes people on this journey. Again, building a campfire, like people just mingle, walk around the room aimlessly, and I play music. And sometimes I choose different movie soundtracks and give some specific instructions. Like I would play, I know there's a really crazy song from the Beetlejuice movie. Mm-hmm. And I tell people, okay, you're like, it's rush hour and you're on your way to work, but you're late but everybody's in your way. Like try to make your way through the crowd. Then maybe there's like elevator music and I'm telling them, okay, now you're in the elevator and you're not looking at anyone. You're just standing really still and trying not to make eye contact. Like it goes through a few different of those scenarios. And then at one point I asked them to find a partner and give them a high five. And that will be like their first partner to have a conversation with or do a little activity with. So sometimes it is answering like an easier question, like what's something you're grateful for right now? Or what does the perfect weekend look like to you? Something like that. And then they kind of say goodbye to their partner. They mingle around the room again. A few other activities with music, probably in between. Find the next person. This time they have to come up with a secret handshake. This is, by the way, where the dance move lived before. So like second partner is a secret handshake. At this point, I'm also asking which pair thinks they came up with the most elaborate handshake, and I'll have them demonstrate in front of the group. Maybe we'll do like 2 or 3. Sometimes I even give away a like coffee gift card so that people can meet up for a coffee afterwards and do the secret handshake at a coffee shop.
The idea.
They get the second question or the second activity. Sometimes, I think second one is, again, a little bit deeper. Sometimes I also start doing some eye-gazing activities at that point, which to me are some really powerful things. So if it's near the end of the event, maybe people are ready for that. But again, the first time around, it'll be more like really quick, like 20, 30 seconds with some fun music in the background. And then they walk around the room again. Third time, I have them not come up with a shared dance move, but a code word or some movement and a word or sound that they're making together. So it's a little bit more uncomfortable. And then we'll do like third round, third question or eye-gazing activity. And at the very end, I have them really quickly find again their high-five partner, their secret handshake partner, do the secret handshake, their like code word partner. And this is a really great closing because people are just like running around the room trying to find each other. And then they get super happy once they did and do a high five and do the handshake. And it just ends in a little bit of chaos, but very high energy. And I kind of like to close my workshops with this. Like if we did the eye gazing and the vulnerable questions, we went like super high energy and fun and excitement to like deep and vulnerable. And then we end on like this high.
I like that. So I assume that you wouldn't do a debrief afterwards.
For this one, no, that would be like the very last thing we do is like even when sometimes I do a version of this activity at the beginning of the event. And then like an hour later, when we are going to close, I would tell them, okay, before we say goodbye, give a high five to your high five partner. And then they go like, oh my God, who was my high five partner? Who was it? And they will always figure it out because there's 2 people trying to remember. And then when they have to do the secret handshake, then that gets really complicated. Oh my God, what was it again? And it's hilarious.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. So what is then your online favorite exercise? I cannot not ask.
I would say it's not as high energy, but it also includes some eye gazing. Because I feel like that's the one thing that we can't really do on Zoom is make eye contact with each other. Because either like one person is looking at the camera. Now I'm looking at my camera right now and you think I'm looking at you, but I can't see you. So now I'm looking at my screen. And if you're looking at the camera, it feels like you're looking at me, but our eyes never match. But there is so much power in like feeling seen by someone else, even if it's simulated, even if it's not real. So I like to do an activity where I have a couple of volunteers, one at a time for like 20, 30 seconds, make eye contact with their camera lens, with their webcam, while I play some cheesy love songs or like movie soundtracks that are really emotional. Like they really amplify anything that is in the room and they just tap into something else. So when then everybody else looks at their screen, they really feel like the other person is looking straight into their eyes. And it always results in a really emotional moment with people tearing up, with feeling so connected to someone else. I used this at a dating event at one point, and people said like, I'm falling in love with the other person, but the other person is not actually looking at them, right? So it's all a simulation, and to me, it's a beautiful reminder that when you want to connect with people, remember to look at the camera every once in a while, because that's how they will feel seen. Also the power that eye contact can have in like every day-to-day life. Like that's how we, if you can make eye contact with someone for like 20, 30 seconds, you must feel really safe and supported in that relationship.
Yeah, good one. And it's funny, I sometimes, when I really want to make sure that I focus on the person, I would even put myself on the big view on Zoom so that the picture of the other person is actually closer to the camera. And I focus on this one. Yeah, because it does make a difference, as you say. We have talked for almost an hour. And I wonder if there's anything on your mind that you think that you would have liked to share that we haven't touched upon yet.
I'll share one phrase that I have put in the back of the box of my Ask Deep Questions cards that maybe, if they come out, hold on. This is a defective one because I had to throw that out. I'm going to hold it to the camera. Maybe you can read it out if it focuses.
Relationships travel at the speed of vulnerability.
Yeah, like that to me is the goal. If I can get my participants to be vulnerable with each other, they will create really deep relationships with each other really quickly, compared to coworkers meeting every single day at the water cooler, just talking about the weather and the sports game from last night. They might spend a lot of time with each other, but not their relationship doesn't really go and grow.
What a wasted opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
That's a very beautiful phrase. Relationships travel at the speed of vulnerability. And it's interesting. I have the impression throughout our conversation, also what I mentioned about your LinkedIn posts, you do the usual stuff, and then you add this one thing that just makes it extraordinary. So not thing that you do the usual. So, but these small things, like at the end of the secret handshake exercise, you give out a voucher for them to meet at a coffee shop to do their secret handshake again. I think these small things really make a difference. So Thank you for sharing your little gems with me on behalf of the audience. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
If someone in the audience fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to walk away with?
I think it's the idea of whatever metaphor you want to use, building the campfire. Like that's the one thing that I'm realizing more and more as I'm attending other people's events, experiences, workshops. I know when it's going too fast, when people put things together too fast and we go too deep too quickly. And there's some events where I kind of know this is the way they organize it, and we're always jumping in like 2 feet first from the first activity. And sometimes that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, although I don't mind being vulnerable with each other, but I also need that time to feel a little bit that I'm arriving and feeling grounded in a new space with new people. And the other thing is just staying at the surface level. So if you never really do more than burning paper, which burns really quickly and really fast, then all you're going to have is smoke and hot air.
Yeah, very good analogy. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing. And I will put all the information, how to reach you, how to sign up for your training, and how to find your deep question cards in the show notes. So dear audience, if you made it to this point, don't forget to scroll down to access all of that.
Yeah, please do. And send me a message if anything resonated. I'd love to know that.
Wonderful. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.